Welcome to the Fire and Passion podcast. I am your host, Jatan Frazier, and this is the very first episode. Now, you'll probably hear my coffee maker in the background because I wasn't sure if I should do it now or if I should wait until after the coffee's brewed, but I never know when my twin nephews are going to wake up because right now they're taking a nap and I need to get this done. And it would be just my luck that they would wake up much earlier than they're supposed to. So we'll deal with the coffee maker. Anyway, I want to tell a quick story before we get into this. I have this thing. I love reading the Bible. I read it most every day. I have developed a habit over the years of trying to read it every day, but I've switched from reading it at night to reading it in the morning. So sometimes I actually get started with my day and I forget. So I might go back to reading it at night. I'm not sure. But I can usually quote things from the Bible, but it's funny because I often get the book and the verse wrong. And I say that because it just reminds me of how good God is, because I may forget what book and verse what I'm quoting is in, but God never forgets, and somehow God always takes me exactly to where I need to be. And this time was no different. So what I wanted to talk about, I thought was in the book of Lamentations. It made sense to me, but apparently it isn't Lamentations. It is in Ecclesiastes, which is another great book to read. I've been asked before by people who, now we have to deal with the garbage truck. But I've been asked by people before who want to read the Bible, who know that they should read their Bible, and they kind of question how can they get into the Bible. Now, the standard answer would, of course, be you start the Bible at the beginning in Genesis and you read through to the book of Revelations. But quite honestly, that's a difficult thing for most people to do. And I get that. So I'll often suggest to people that they should start in the books of wisdom. So in places like Proverbs, I usually say Proverbs because Proverbs has a lot of great advice, and I think for people who don't necessarily have a great relationship with God, sometimes pointing them to something like that kind of helps them ease in a little bit. But I think that I might start changing my answer and say start with Ecclesiastes. Now, why Ecclesiastes? Well, when I look at the condition of the world today, it's frightening. You see so many people who are not just unbelievers in God, but they've developed this downright hatred of Him and all things that are of Him. And what's worse is that we've come to a point where we cannot tell the difference now between Christians and non-Christians, because Christians are behaving exactly the same way as the unbelievers. And this is a major problem, because how can we be a city on the hill? How can we be a light when we're hiding them under bushel barrels? Like when we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing as people of faith, how can we then enact the changes that the world is desperate for? Because what I see a lot of times in the people who hate God, they're still searching for something. It's the human condition that we were made to worship something. Many times what they worship is either themselves or essentially the altar of idolatry, which is all idolatry. Anything that separates you from God, of course, would be considered idolatry. But, science, which has become this major idol, and technology, the phones, and, this idea of humanitarianism, which says that we can do good works and not have to put God into it. Now, of course, I have plans to talk about the idea of morality and the unbeliever later. But I'm pointing these things out because one of the things that I've believed, and the more and more that I read the Bible, the more that I understand that none of this that we're seeing is new. You read the Old Testament, you read the New Testament. None of what we are experiencing in this life is new. And that's where the book of Ecclesiastes comes in. Now, it was written by King Solomon, who, of course, one of the things he asked for from God was more wisdom. So God gave him more wisdom than any man who had ever lived and any man who will live. And even with all the wisdom that King Solomon had, at the end, he still failed. He still fell. And so he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, I suppose, as sort of as a warning. Because it's sort of like the idea of not taking the blessings and the life that we have for granted. What I would like to concentrate on is the idea of a theme that he says all throughout it, which is essentially, it's all smoke. Everything is smoke. And I remember the first time reading that and thinking, yeah, that's right. It's all smoke. And you would think like, okay, it's all smoke, but what does that mean? And why even do a podcast style sermon or anything on the idea of life being all smoke? But he tells us. And so this is verse 2 to 11 that I'm going to read right now. And I'm reading from the Message version of the Bible. I like this one because it's in contemporary speak. Of course, I have, the standard scholarly version, which is the NRSV and, the ESV and all the other different types. But I like the Message because it's in plain standard English. So it says, smoke, nothing but smoke. That's what the quester says. There's nothing to anything, it's all smoke. What's there to show for a lifetime of work? A lifetime of working your fingers to the bone. One generation goes its way, the next one arrives. But nothing changes. It's business as usual for old planet Earth. The sun comes up and the sun goes down, then does it again and again, the same old round. The wind blows south, the wind blows north. Around and around and around it blows, blowing this way, then that, the whirling erratic wind. All the rivers flow into the sea, but the sea never fills up. The rivers keep flowing to the same old place, and then start all over and do it again. Everything's boring, utterly boring. No one can find any meaning in it. Boring to the eye, boring to the ear. What was will be again. What happened will happen again. There's nothing new on this earth. Year after year, it's the same old thing. Does someone call out, hey, this is new? Don't get excited. It's the same old story. Nobody remembers what happened yesterday. And the things that will happen tomorrow, nobody will remember them either. Don't count on being remembered. And then I'm going to add 2 chapter 2, verse 1, which he says, I said to myself, let's go for it. Experiment with pleasure. Have a good time. But there was nothing to it. Nothing but smoke. One of the things that impressed me about this, especially when we look at today, is this idea that we believe that the life that we're living currently, the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of technology, the pursuit of material things, we look at things like feminism and the sexual revolution and the promise that this pleasure was going to make us happy. We look at the idea of abortion and we say, well, killing your own child is going to make you happy because then you're going to be able to accomplish things. Everything is about taking our attention away from the things that are important. So we walk around with these sort of blinders on a lot of times. And that's what I see in this world so much, is that we have these blinders that stop us from focusing, that stop us from seeing things. Solomon, for all of his wisdom, even admits it. For all the wisdom that I have, what you come to understand is that that wisdom is meaningless. So you begin to ask the question, well, what is even the point of all of this? What is the point of gaining knowledge? What is the point of putting it into today's terms? What is the point of pursuing relationships? What is the point of getting married? What is the point of having a stable family? What is the point of anything that is moral and was set by God? Clearly we see people asking these questions. And clearly we see people coming to the wrong conclusions. Because now we have this movement to take things even further away. Well, there's no point to life, therefore let's just degrade life even further. Let's dehumanize anybody that we don't like. Let's destroy what caused us to do better. There's a part in here when Solomon talks about hating life. And I think what I like about this book is it gets to the heart of human nature. Because I'm sure we've all had these questions, and we all look at society today, and perhaps you are one of the Christians who look at the world today and you've determined for yourself, well, what's the point in saying anything? And that's the thing. What I really want to concentrate on, and why I read that, is because I do believe that we as Christians need to learn how to be different. And that's part of what birthed out this podcast. I had one previously, but I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't able to figure out where I wanted it to go. It was during the time where things were so chaotic in both the world and in my personal life, that it was just not a good time. And I'm not even sure that even this time around it's a good time. But I do believe that unless we push forward as God would have us do, unless we step out on faith, then we cannot expect good things to happen. And that's really what I want. I want the listeners of this podcast to be blessed. Not just by my words, because my words are meaningless. I kind of agree with Solomon on that. It's all smoke. But God's words are not smoke. And that's the difference. When we focus on things that are of God, then those things are not smoke. Because then we're doing what He's called us to do. We're doing and living as we're supposed to. And I can only imagine what the world would look like if Christians actually lived the way that they were supposed to. Man, I do believe that that would be such a beautiful vision if Christians, if the church, if those who profess belief and faith in God actually stood up and did what they were supposed to do. Then imagine the change to the world that could happen. That's why this is called Fire and Passion, because until we have that passion for God, until we have that fire, until we allow ourselves to be utilized by Him, until we learn to say that we've had enough of allowing the world to have its way, things cannot change. And if you're the kind of Christian who is full of vision, full of fire, full of passion, full of all the things that you know God has for you, if you desire to gain what it is that God has for you, if you are just looking to have just some questions answered. I can't answer all questions, but God can. And until we come to Him, we're not going to have a lot of our questions answered. But I want this to be a place where we can just listen and just begin to ask those questions of both ourselves and ask those questions of God, and just let Him rebuild that fire and passion so that we could be people who would stand on biblical truth. Because until we stand on biblical truth, we're never going to be worth anything. And it might be that might be a bad place to kind of leave it right now, but I kind of believe that that is true. So I'll be back. Right now, this will probably be a little bit more infrequent just because I don't know how often I want this thing to be. Could be weekly, could be daily a bit, or maybe not daily because I just don't have that kind of time. But it's still something that is developing. And right now, as I'm doing this in a way that leaves me less in control and God more in control, I want this to be a platform that He builds His way. Because I do believe that that's the right way. If God builds it, it will stand. If our foundation is on Him, He is the rock. The knowledge of him is the rock. And if we build our lives on a firm foundation, that foundation will forever stand. If we build it in sand, if we build it on anything other than on the rock that is God, then we'll have nothing, because it'll all be blown away like smoke, and it'll be like it had never existed. So I hope you guys have a blessed day. I hope you decide that this might be interesting enough that you will be willing to tune in when I do updates and things like that. And I guess I will talk to you guys later. Bye.